All right, hi guys and gals. It is Mr. Forgione. I just wanted to go through a little bit of AP Micro review for you. Hopefully at this point we've been taking a look at the AP Gov stuff, we know the Congress stuff, but I want to take a look over at the Econ stuff. Now we don't know what subjects are actually going to be on the test just yet. That's mainly the reason I haven't gotten into any new materials. I'm waiting for Friday to see exactly what's going to be on there. But I feel very confident in saying a couple of things that will be on there, namely supply and demand and elasticity. That's stuff that the AP would have expected everybody to have covered at this point, and we're no different. We've covered that. So I wanted to just go back through and review a little bit with you on that, and I'll give you guys a couple more practice problems here at the end that I'll attach both in the link and also on Google Classroom as well for you guys to take a look at. So first off, we've got our supply curve upward sloping just like usual, our demand curve downward sloping just like usual, and then they meet here in the middle with what's called equilibrium. That's just where our quantity supplied and quantity demanded come together, or the center point of the X. So we always kind of start from that point. This is our equilibrium quantity. This is our equilibrium price. Now, if we were at any point above that equilibrium, so at any point up here, what that would mean is that we end up with two separate points, two separate quantities, so to speak. One for supply and one for demand. So let's just, for the sake of argument, we'll say we're somewhere in this vicinity, okay? We now have two separate points, two separate quantities here, okay? One for supply, one for demand. If we were to take a look and see which one is greater, we say, okay, there's the quantity that's on the supply, here's the quantity that's on the demand. We can clearly see that the one that's on the supply curve, the quantity supplied, is greater than the quantity that's on the demand. So that tells us here, if the quantity supplied greater than the quantity demanded, that is a surplus. We've got excess supply. We've got too much of something here. So anytime our price is above equilibrium, we've got a surplus, and that makes sense if I think about it, because what that's telling us, hey, the price is too high. If the price is too high, not enough people are buying something, there's stuff left over. There's too much of it. Now, by comparison, if the price was down here, if the price was underneath the equilibrium, or the price was too low, we'd have the exact opposite going on. Then the quantity that would be the greatest would be that's on the demand curve. The quantity demanded would be greater than the quantity supplied. Whenever that's the case, whenever the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, instead of a surplus, we call that a shortage. So then we'd have a shortage. We don't have enough of it. Okay, so think right now, toilet paper. Okay, there is certainly not enough toilet paper right now, and so the solution from a purely economic standpoint would be to raise the price. Now, we're not necessarily going to be doing that here in the midst of a crisis, but that would be, in a true free market sense, that would be the best solution, is to raise the price of that to eliminate the shortage. Now, one of the things that you may have noticed as you're looking at this is going, wait, that quantity supplied is way closer to the equilibrium. That quantity demanded way further away. This graph looks a little off. It looks different than our normal supply and demand curve. And if you notice that, okay, you get the gold star today. You kind of picked up on something here. So this does not look quite like our typical supply and demand curve, because I've switched them up a little bit so that you guys could kind of see the variance in elasticity for each one. Okay, if we take a look here between the demand and the supply, which one is steeper? Which one has a steeper slope here? And you'd probably look at that and go, okay, well, the supply has a steeper slope. Which one is flatter? Which one has a flatter slope? Well, that's the demand. The demand has a much flatter slope. So what that means for us is that just looking at these two, we can actually determine the elasticity by their various slopes. So if we have one that's steeper, like here the supply curve, that's going to be more inelastic or inelastic. Remember, we said that if the slope of a curve is steep, almost like an I, inelastic. What does that mean? Well, if we're talking about supply here, what it means for it to be inelastic is that they're not really able to adjust their supply when the price of an item goes up. So if you think about something like, let's say real estate, or specifically land, okay, if you're talking about, let's say land in the downtown Gainesville area, or land around the GHS area, maybe that you might want to use for, say, parking, or for additional athletic facilities, something like that. We have an inelastic supply of that land because there's only so much of it to go around. So even if the price went up and we'd want to try to make more of it or sell more of it, we really can't. We can't adjust. We're not flexible. We can't adjust to that rise in price because there's only a set supply or a certain amount of land to go around here. By comparison, if we take a look at demand, the demand is flatter. And we said if it's flatter, that tends to be more elastic. And so if we carried this out to the extreme and you had a perfectly elastic curve, that would be with just a line straight across, it kind of looks like an E just without the top bar. Now, if we're talking demand here and we say, all right, elastic demand, what does that mean? That means that the good must be a luxury good. That whenever we've got elastic demand for an item, it must be a luxury, meaning if the price of that item goes up, we're really not going to buy it. Whatever the price of the item increases by, you'd have a greater percentage decrease in the quantity bought. So if you think about something like a sports car, okay, that's very much a luxury item. For the most part, when the price of a sports car would increase, okay, most people are going, I don't need that. I don't have the ability or don't really have the desire to spend my limited income on that. And so you'd have, if let's say the price went up by 10%, you might have a 20% decrease in the quantity demanded. So again, for demand, if a good is elastic, that means it's a luxury. What that also means is that for demand, if it's inelastic, if you have an inelastic demand, then you have a necessity. So again, going back to toilet paper, which we've talked about before, very much a necessity. Other things right now, laundry detergent, deodorant, household items like that, those are also going to be inelastic. Meaning if the price goes up, the majority of people are still going to buy them. So if let's say the price of deodorant went up by say 10%, you might have a 2 or 3% decline in the amount of deodorant that's purchased. You might have a little decline, but not nearly as much as the increase in price, at least percentage-wise. What is, by comparison for supply, what does an elastic supply mean? If you have an elastic supply, that means you are able to adjust to whatever comes out, to whatever the price change is. So when you're talking about manufacturing certain things, if you have an increase in price, you're able to quickly get on the ball and create more of that item. Certainly in the technological age, anything that's produced digitally, like digital music, when the price of those things go up, you're able to certainly produce a lot more. Streaming video, right now we're certainly seeing an uptick in services like Netflix and Hulu because everyone's being quarantined or at least doing social distancing at home. We see that there's more demand for those items. The price can go up on those items, and certainly, thankfully right now the streaming services haven't raised their prices a lot during the coronavirus pandemic, but if they did, they could quickly create more of this if they want to. Anytime you have a streaming service, it's very easy to create more content or create more of the product. So that's sort of the elasticity here that we're looking at. I'll give you some practice problems to kind of look back at that. I'm also going to give you some practice problems later in the week that deal with what makes supply and demand go up and down. I'll talk more about that as we go and review more of that as we go as well. But this is just sort of a brief intro, or a brief review, I should say, on some of these topics that we've already talked about. One thing I did want to mention before I leave off here is the concept of ceilings and floors, because that's something that AP tends to like quite a bit as well, as ceilings and floors. Ceilings and floors tend to be a game of opposites. We said earlier that when the price is up here, when the price is too high and it results in a surplus, quantity supply greater than quantity demanded, We would see that situation if there was a price floor. That's the opposite of what we might think. Usually we're thinking, oh, up here, up above equilibrium, that would be a ceiling, right? No, a ceiling's a maximum, okay? A ceiling would be something like putting a maximum on what you could charge for rent. Well, the problem with that, if you're saying, well, this is the max, this is the ceiling, you can't go above that ceiling, okay, that doesn't really have any impact. We're not. We're just going to go back to equilibrium. But if you put a floor on something like, say, minimum wage, this is the least that you can possibly pay somebody legally. If this is the equilibrium and we've got minimum wage up here as a floor, this is the bottom. You can't go below that floor. Now we can't get to equilibrium. That causes the surplus. So a floor is actually going to be above equilibrium. And then a ceiling is going to be below. If we put a ceiling down here, now you can't go above a ceiling. That's actually going to make an impact. When we say make an impact, it means it's binding, it means it's effective, it actually does something. If we had a ceiling here, that wouldn't be binding, that wouldn't actually do anything. We would just be right at equilibrium. But if we have a floor up here, we can't go below that floor. That actually does make an impact. So again, I'll give you some practice on this, pretty much review. I'll throw that out there both via email as well as on Google Classroom. Feel free to comment, feel free to email me anything that you guys found confusing on this. Hope you all are staying safe. Love and miss you guys, and we'll see you soon.